There was a night about 3 years ago when I stood in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner at 2 in the morning, still wearing the dress I had put on for my mother-in-law's dinner party, holding my phone with both hands because I was shaking too hard to hold it with one. I had just been escorted out of the ER by a security guard who thought I was a visitor causing a scene. I was not a visitor. I was the patient who had walked out against medical advice because my mother-in-law had cornered my doctor in the hallway and told him I was having a mental breakdown and could not be trusted to make my own decisions. I remember looking down at my shoes in that parking lot. They were the beige heels I had bought specifically because my mother-in-law once said my usual boots looked too aggressive for family dinners. I stood there looking at those shoes and I thought, I bought shoes to make her comfortable, and she just tried to have me committed. That was the night everything became very clear to me. Let me go back to the beginning, because the beginning matters. It always does. I met my husband at a work conference in Nashville. I was 27 and working as a forensic paralegal for a mid-size firm downtown. He was an architectural project manager from out of state, attending the same conference for reasons I still don't entirely understand because our industries had almost nothing to do with each other. We met at the hotel bar on the second night, talked until the bartender turned the lights up, and did long distance for 8 months before he asked me to move to his city. I want to be honest about this. I was happy. Genuinely happy. He was kind in the specific way that matters, which is to say he was kind when there was nothing to gain from it. He remembered small things. He drove 40 minutes to bring me soup when I had a cold during those 8 months apart. I was not naive or desperate. I was a woman who had found someone she believed in, and I made a deliberate choice to build a life with him. His mother. I will call her what she was, which is the woman who ran that household like a small country with a one-person government. Had opinions about me from the very first phone call. My husband warned me gently, in the careful way people warn you about things they don't want to fully admit. She's particular, he said. She just needs time to warm up. I gave her time. I gave her 18 months of time. I learned how she took her coffee. I sent handwritten notes after every visit. I asked about her garden and I actually listened to the answers. She never warmed up. What she did instead was study me. I understand that now. At the time I read her silence as shyness and her sharp comments as a generational communication style. Looking back, I can see she was taking inventory. My job. My education. The fact that I came from a family with no money and had built my own career from scratch. The fact that my husband and I had opened a joint savings account 8 months before the wedding. The fact that I was, in her exact words to her sister, which her sister later told me, entirely too self-sufficient for someone in that position. What position? I asked his aunt that question directly. His aunt looked at her hands and said, the position of being married to her son. My husband's family had money, not the kind of money that makes headlines, but the kind that makes decisions. His grandfather had built a commercial real estate company in the 70s, and the family still drew income from the portfolio. His mother controlled the family trust as the primary executor. My husband received a quarterly distribution. It was not the majority of our income. I want to be clear about that. But it was significant, and his mother used the control of it the way some people use car keys. You want to go somewhere. You need the keys. And the keys live with her. I found this out slowly. The distribution that was delayed for 3 weeks the month after we got married, and my husband didn't want to stress me out by mentioning it. The family meeting I was excluded from the Christmas before our first anniversary, which my husband attended alone and came home from quiet and strange. The way my mother-in-law would reference the trust in conversations that had nothing to do with money, casually, like mentioning the weather. Of course that kind of trip would be lovely, given what you have access to. Given what you have access to. Not what you've earned. Not what you've saved. What you have access to, through her son, through her. I did not make a scene about any of this. I had grown up watching my own mother navigate situations where making a scene cost more than staying quiet, and I had learned that lesson maybe too well. I kept notes. Not dramatically, not in a dedicated journal, just in my phone, the way I kept notes at work. Dates. Quotes. Context. I am a paralegal. I document things by instinct. I found out I was pregnant on a Tuesday morning in October. I was 11 weeks along. I had known for about a week, but I had waited because I wanted to tell my husband first, at the right moment, without an audience. I told him that evening over dinner I cooked at home. He cried, good tears. The kind that make you feel solid about a person. We decided to tell his family at the upcoming Sunday dinner. His sister would be there, his aunt, his mother. It felt like the right time. I was cautious about telling people early, but my husband was so genuinely excited that I didn't want to take that from him. I want to say that clearly, I made that choice because I loved him, not because I was careless. The dinner was at his mother's house. She cooked, as she always did, and the table was set the way she set it for occasions that mattered to her. The good cloth napkins, the crystal glasses. I remember thinking that was a good sign. I remember being relieved. My husband announced it during the salad course. His aunt made a sound that was purely joy. His sister looked genuinely surprised and then smiled in a way that reached her eyes. His mother set down her fork. How far along? She asked. 11 weeks, I told her. She looked at me for a long moment in a way I had never seen her look at me before. Not cold. Something more calculated than cold. And the timing just worked out this way, she said. It was not a question. I asked her what she meant. I'm just noting, she said, that your husband's grandfather's trust dispersal clause activates when the primary male heir produces a child. I'm sure you knew that. I had not known that. I'm sure it's just a happy coincidence, she said, and picked her fork back up. The dinner continued. My husband squeezed my hand under the table. I ate my food and I said the right things, and I drove home later that night with a specific cold feeling in my sternum that I recognized from my years of legal work. It was the feeling of watching someone lay the groundwork for something. 2 weeks later, I slipped on the back stairs of my mother-in-law's house. I need to say that carefully because I spent a long time not being sure about what happened. The stairs were stone. It had rained. I had been invited for tea, just the two of us, and I had come because refusing felt worse than going. I was carrying a small dish I had brought as a gesture, a jar of honey from a local farm, which sounds absurd now, and I was at the top of the back staircase that led from the garden terrace to the lower patio when my foot went out from under me. I fell 7 steps. I know it was 7, because I counted them afterward, sitting at the bottom with my hand on my abdomen and my elbow bleeding on the stone. My mother-in-law was behind me when I fell. That is what I know. I did not see her hands. I cannot tell you with certainty what her hands were doing. What I can tell you is what she said when she reached the bottom of the stairs and crouched down next to me. She looked at me with an expression that was careful and deliberate and said, "You have to be so careful in your condition. You could lose everything." She called my husband. She told him I had fallen on the wet stairs. She handed me her phone so I could hear his voice, and I heard him, scared and driving. And I held the phone and looked at her, and she looked back at me with that careful expression, and I understood something completely for the first time. She was not worried about me. She was not even performing worry. She was watching to see what I would do next. My husband took me to the ER. I had bruised 2 ribs and sprained my wrist. The baby was fine. I heard that heartbeat and I held onto it in my chest like a physical object. The baby was fine. The ER was the hospital where my mother-in-law had been a long-time donor. I did not know this when we arrived. I found out when the attending physician came in, spent 4 minutes with me, and then stepped out and did not come back for an hour. When he came back, he was different, less direct. He suggested I follow up with my OB and said a social worker might want to check in, because falls during pregnancy could sometimes indicate stress in the home environment. I am a forensic paralegal. I know what that language means and where it comes from. My mother-in-law was in the hallway. I could see her through the window of the room. The small square of glass in the door. Talking to my doctor with her hand on his forearm. My husband was in the chair next to my bed, and when I pointed this out to him, he said she was probably just thanking the staff, that she donated to the hospital foundation, that she was just being her. She told him something, I said. She wouldn't do that, he said. I want to be fair to my husband at this point in the story. He is not a cruel person. He is a person who was raised inside a very specific story about his mother, and that story had been constructed carefully over decades, and he had no reason to question its architecture. I was the new element in the system. I was the variable that didn't fit the established pattern. When something didn't add up, it was easier to adjust his understanding of me than to rebuild his understanding of me, than to rebuild his understanding of her. I know that now. At the time I found it unbearable. My sister-in-law appeared at the door of the room 40 minutes later. She had not been called. I knew this because my husband had not called her and I had not called her. She had a folder of papers in her hand, and she was upset in the performative way of someone who has practiced being upset. "I need to talk to my brother," she said, and looked at me like I was an obstacle in a hallway. My husband stepped out. I watched through the window. I could not hear them, but I could see my sister-in-law passing him papers from the folder and talking rapidly, and my husband's posture changing. The way it changed when he was receiving information he did not know how to process. That slight forward lean, that stillness in the hands. He came back in and sat down. He did not sit the same way he had been sitting. "She's saying the pregnancy isn't." He stopped. He pressed his hand to his mouth. "She brought something from my mother. A note from a doctor she hired, saying that you—" He stopped again. "She's saying it's not mine." I looked at him. I had bruised ribs and a sprained wrist, and I was 13 weeks pregnant, and I had just watched my mother-in-law talk to my doctor in the hallway, and now I was looking at my husband falling for it in real time. "That is not true," I said. "I know," he said. But he said it the way people say "I know," when what they mean is, "I don't know what to think." "My phone," I said. "I need my phone." He handed it to me and I called my friend. I had one person in this city I trusted completely. A woman I had worked with before who was now at a different firm, who was sharper than anyone I had ever met in professional or personal life. I told her where I was and what was happening, and she said she'd be there in 20 minutes. While I waited, my mother-in-law came into the room. She sat down in the chair without asking. She folded her hands in her lap. She looked at me with an expression that I can only describe as the face of someone who believes they have already won. "I want what's best for my son," she said. "I know you believe that," I told her. "The trust is my responsibility to protect," she said. "I have a duty." "You understand duties, don't you? You work in law." "I work in law," I agreed. "A paternity challenge is straightforward," she said. "And in the meantime, a conservatorship petition based on the attending's notes from tonight would give us." "That's enough," I said. She blinked. I think she expected me to cry, or argue, or beg. I had done all of those things in small ways over the previous 2 years, and she had catalogued each instance and built a picture of me as someone who could be managed. She had miscalculated what I would do when the stakes became absolute. "I have documented everything," I said. "Every delayed distribution, every excluded meeting, every comment you made in front of witnesses. The conversation at the dinner table when you mentioned the trust clause. The fact that you were standing behind me on those stairs." Her face did not change, but something behind her face changed. "I have a very good memory," I told her. "And I have been taking notes since before your son and I were married, because I grew up learning that women like me, in situations like this, do not get the benefit of the doubt, and the only thing that protects us is documentation." My friend arrived 18 minutes later, not 20. She spoke to the attending. She spoke to the hospital administrator on call. She clarified, in the specific language of someone who understands liability, what the medical and legal implications of a conservatorship petition filed on false grounds would be for the hospital, the attending, and the individuals who had initiated it. The attending's notes from that evening were amended before we left to reflect the actual clinical picture, which was a pregnant woman with bruised ribs and a sprained wrist following a fall on wet stairs. We left. I did not speak to my mother-in-law again that night. I walked out past her in the hallway in the same beige heels I had bought to make her comfortable, and I did not look at her. My husband drove me home. We did not talk much. He was processing something and I let him process it without narrating it for him. Some things have to work themselves out in a person's own mind. He chose his mother. I want to say that plainly, because it is the part of this story that took me the longest to accept. He didn't choose her dramatically or cruelly. He chose her the way you choose the story you've been living in over the truth that dismantles it. He asked me, 2 weeks later, to take some time while his mother's attorney reviewed the trust situation. He said he just needed clarity. He said he loved me, but he needed to know. I told him to call me when he figured out the difference between needing to know and being told what to think. I moved into my friend's guest room with 2 suitcases and my laptop and my phone. I was 15 weeks pregnant. I had a job. I had documentation. I had a very good friend and, it turned out, a very good attorney. The paternity results, when they came back, were exactly what I had told him they would be. His. 100% his. His mother's hired doctor, who turned out to have had his license suspended in the neighboring state for falsifying records in a custody case, which is the kind of thing that comes up when someone runs a proper background check, retracted the report. My mother-in-law's attorney contacted my attorney shortly after. I did not take his calls. I had learned by then that some conversations are not negotiations. They are attempts to renegotiate reality, and I was done participating in that. The legal process was not fast, and it was not easy, and there is a long chapter of this story that involved a lot of discovery, a lot of late nights, a lot of mornings when I woke up in my friend's guest room at 4 a.m. and lay there watching the ceiling and talking to my baby in my head, because talking to my baby in my head was the only thing that kept the panic from turning into something I couldn't manage. I am not going to give you the procedural details because they are not the point. The point is that forensic paralegals, when motivated and assisted by a competent attorney and a network of professionals who document things for a living, are not easy adversaries. My daughter was born in late spring. She was healthy and loud, and I was 31 years old and alone in that delivery room in the specific way of someone who has chosen to be there without the people who should have been there, and that was one of the hardest moments of my life. I want to be honest about that. The victory part of this story does not erase the hard part. My friend was in the waiting room. She came in after and held my daughter and cried, and that was enough. That was more than enough. My husband signed the papers. I will not say he was a villain in the end because I don't believe that. I believe he was a person who had been formed inside a very specific structure, and when that structure required him to choose between his mother and his wife, he chose the structure he knew. He will have to live with that. He does live with it. I know this because his aunt still sends me occasional messages, and she has told me that he is not doing well, that he understands now what happened, that he has regrets. I read those messages and I feel something that is not satisfaction and not forgiveness. It is more like a distant recognition. I see you. I understand now. It's too late, but I see you. His mother's attempt to use the attending's notes as grounds for a conservatorship, combined with the retracted false paternity report, combined with the evidence of the trust manipulation, combined with the background of the doctor she had hired, my attorney built a case that the opposing attorney could not dismantle without exposing their own client further. My mother-in-law did not go to federal prison, which is not how reality works as cleanly as it does in stories. What she did do is lose her executorship of the trust, which was transferred to an independent trustee after a probate court review. She lost the mechanism she had used for 30 years to run her family. That was, in the assessment of everyone who knew her, worse. My daughter is 2.5 now. She has my eyes and her father's stubborn lower lip, which I find funny in a way I can't fully explain. We live in a house that I own, which I bought with money I saved and a mortgage I qualified for on my own income, which is considerably higher than it used to be, because it turns out that a forensic paralegal with a documented case history involving trust fraud, conservatorship abuse, and medical record manipulation has a very specific and valuable specialty. I did not build this life to punish anyone. I want to be clear about that. The way I am clear about everything now. Punishment is a story that keeps you looking backward, and I am not interested in backward. I built this life because my daughter is going to grow up in a house where the people inside it are honest with her about how the world works and what it asks of women who refuse to be managed. She is going to know that documentation is power. She is going to know that notes in your phone matter. She is going to know that leaving is not losing. Some nights, I put her to bed. And then I sit in the kitchen with a glass of water and I think about that parking lot outside the ER. And those beige heels. And the moment I stood there and understood what I was dealing with, I was so frightened that night. I want to acknowledge that because I think the way these stories get told often skips the fear, and the fear is real and important and nothing to be ashamed of. I was frightened. I documented everything anyway. I made calls anyway. I left anyway. That is the whole story. There is no version of it where I stopped being afraid and then acted. I acted afraid, every single step, and the fear got smaller as I went because fear shrinks when you keep moving through it. I turned off the kitchen light and went to check on my daughter. She was asleep with one arm thrown over her head the way she always sleeps, completely unconscious of every decision that had been made to get her here safely. I stood in her doorway for a while. The house was quiet in the way that only a safe house is quiet. This is what I want you to take from my story. The people who try to control you are counting on you to prioritize their comfort over your own survival. They are counting on you to smooth things over, to give benefit of the doubt one more time, to believe that keeping the peace is the same thing as being safe. It is not the same thing. Know the difference between the two. Write things down. Make the call, and do not, under any circumstances, buy shoes to make someone else comfortable. If you are living inside a story someone else built for you, and it is costing you your safety and your clarity and your sense of your own reality, I want you to hear this. You are allowed to put the story down. You are allowed to walk away from it. The life on the other side is quieter than you think and more solid than you imagine, and completely, entirely yours. Thank you for being here and listening to this. If any part of what I shared today connected with something you're carrying, please tell me in the comments. I read every one. If this helped you or someone you know, share it. Not for the numbers, but because someone who needs to hear this might be one click away. Take care of yourselves. I mean that. I have thought a lot about cause and effect since everything happened. Not in a dramatic way, just the quiet, practical way you think about things when the dust settles and you finally have enough distance to see the whole shape of something. My mother-in-law made choices, deliberate, calculated choices that she had probably rehearsed for years before I ever walked through her door. She chose to see me as a threat rather than a person. She chose to use a hospital as a weapon. She chose to feed her son a lie rather than let him think for himself. And every one of those choices produced an outcome that was entirely consistent with the choice itself. That is not poetic justice or cosmic balance. It is just how cause and effect actually works when you strip away the noise. What you do has weight. It lands somewhere. Eventually, it lands on you. What I did not expect was how true that would be for my own choices too. When I started keeping notes on my phone, dates, quotes, context, I was not building a legal strategy. I was a woman trying to stay sane inside a situation that kept telling me I was imagining things. Documentation was the only way I could trust my own memory. It was the most honest thing I knew how to do, and it turned out that honesty, sustained over time and attached to evidence, is one of the most powerful things a person can possess. Not because it feels powerful in the moment. It rarely does. It felt tedious and lonely and slightly paranoid. But it was accurate. And accuracy eventually matters more than almost anything else. My friend, the one who showed up 18 minutes after I called, not 20, she taught me something I keep returning to. She said once, during the worst of it, that the only people who are truly dangerous are the ones who are certain they will not be held accountable. Certainty is what makes people careless. My mother-in-law was certain. She had been certain for so long that she had stopped covering her tracks. And that certainty is what undid her, not me. I think about my daughter growing up watching how I handle things. That is the part that keeps me honest on the days when being honest is inconvenient. She is going to notice everything. Kids do. She is going to learn what it looks like when someone is frightened but keeps going anyway. She is going to learn that intelligence is not just about knowing things. It is about staying clear-eyed when people are actively trying to blur your vision. She is going to learn that leaving a situation that is costing you your sense of reality is not weakness. It is the most rigorous thing a person can do. I do not have a tidy conclusion about what happened to my husband or his mother. Life rarely offers those. What I have is a quiet house, a child who sleeps with one arm thrown over her head, and a career that is built entirely on my own credibility. That is enough. That is, in fact, exactly enough. If you are in the middle of something that keeps making you question yourself, I want to say this directly. Write it down. Call the person you actually trust. Make the decision that protects you even if it costs you the story you thought your life was gonna be. The story on the other side is not a consolation prize, it is the real one. You just have to be willing to walk toward it.